So welcome everybody. My speaker today is Dr. Robin Hornstein from Hornstein Platt and Associates, and she's going to be speaking with us about demisexuality and asexuality in dating. Dr. Hornstein, can you tell us a little bit about your work?
Absolutely. So I have been a psychologist for 38 years, and I own a private practice, and we have 45 providers. We have psychiatry. Um, it's a counseling and wellness practice, but my specific interest has always been in the LGBTQI community, as well as eating disorders. Those are my two big specialty areas. And in both of those areas and in all of the general work we do, obviously dating and sexuality come up all the time, and gender and sexual expression and all of that. And so this is kind of something that barely gets by when you're in recovery from working on like an eating disorder or anxiety, because people want to be in relationships, they really do. And, you have a question. I know we talking about demisexuality and asexuality and dating, and I'm happy to talk about that with you.
So tell us a little bit about that. What's the difference between being an asexual person or someone who identifies as asexual and someone who identifies as being demisexual?
Okay, so asexuality is somebody who a lot of their feelings towards others in romantic ways or attraction ways do not end up in a sexual feeling, in lots of sexual feelings. There's not that component is not, it may be there a little bit, but it is not the primary or necessary ingredient in relationship for someone who is asexual.
Mm-hmm. And for someone who's demisexual, it's there, but it's not as primary.
Demisexuality is really different than that. It's very different than asexuality. Demisexual person or someone who identifies as demisexual absolutely has sexual feelings that they're attuned to. But again, for them, what's more important is developing a relationship. And it may not even be, it could be a friend. It doesn't matter who they develop this feeling with. But first comes an emotional component, an emotional trust and safety and connection before a sexual attraction comes. So for somebody who is more in the sort of general responsiveness of sexuality, and I say that's a very loose term, that kind of person might look across the room and see somebody who is, really to them very hot, right? And they're like, oh, wow, right? For someone who is demisexual, they may also notice that, but really that's not the most important feature of what they're seeing. What they're looking for is connection, and then the sexual feelings come later and really, really in a relationship of trust.
So in terms of dating preferences, likes and dislikes, how would you be able to know if you were someone who was asexual or demisexual, or if you were dating someone who might be asexual or demisexual?
It's a whole other question. So yeah, that's a really big one. So I think the deal is that people who have already identified themselves tend to use that in their online profiles, or when they meet somebody, they're pretty upfront about it. Not unlike, somebody who's, clearly affiliated with a religious group might say that because they want to date someone similar to them. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the dating apps will ask, how do you define your sexuality, and how important is it in the relationship to you? So mm-hmm. that's one key feature. People who don't know just sort of, but they do know how they operate in relationship. They may not label it. And, I think a lot of times people these days are like, why so many labels for so many things? And I think part of it is, in some ways, it helps identify who you are and who you might choose to be with, and how you express your gender, your sexuality, your sexual preference. All of that comes out when you are really looking at, these are the ways I relate to other people. Mm-hmm. And it's that, I think, it in the expression of it, in the saying of it, what you're doing is you're cutting out a lot of sort of disappointment that other people may have when other people's sexuality is like ever ready and really interested in sex, and it could be part of a relationship or just something they do for fun, and that's fine, and that's a whole different area. But when you put two people together who haven't identified those differences, it doesn't always lead to an easy beginning of a relationship or a relationship at all.
Yeah. And some people, let's say, right, also just as a separate thing, struggle with sexlessness in their relationship, and it's not necessarily one of these issues.
No, I think there are lots of reasons why some people in their relationships stop having as much sex as they had at the beginning. First of all, that is pretty normal in a relationship to start out with a little, a more sexual relationship than you might end up with, because as you get familiar, as life goes on, as things happen, as people age, as their bodies change, as people have babies, as people, like all the things that start to happen may change the amount of time that one spends in the sexual portion of a relationship. So you're differentiating between, people who end up in not having sex at all in a long-term relationship. That is not necessarily connected to starting out asexual or demisexual. No.
What about, I guess I wonder that it might be a struggle for someone who is either asexual or either identifies as asexual or demisexual. We live in such a sex-driven society, and I wonder how you see that kind of affects folks that you work with who are asexual or demisexual.
Yeah, I think what we end up doing, and I know we have sex therapists in our practice, and I know this is really important for them, is, be loud and be proud, like not feeling like you are different or weird or diagnosable, right? That this is who you are. And if you present it with certainty, just as you present any other part of your personality and who you are, and not apologetically, you're going to get a lot further in a relationship. Because first of all, you might find somebody that's just like you, is like, oh my God, this is perfect. Like, I want to hold hands for months and months and months, and I want to get to know you. And, right now, given COVID, we're also not moving that quickly. So yeah, I think it can get in the way if you don't know it, or you haven't identified it, or you start dating someone who hasn't identified it. So I think being honest with yourself and not being ashamed of yourself is super key in this picture, because everyone is entitled to date. Everyone is entitled to have a relationship, and also to be themselves in that relationship, and not to push themselves to be somebody they're not.
So you just gave some, but are there other tips that you have for someone who's asexual or identifies as demisexual, either way, that might help them feel like they can date in a way that feels comfortable and safe for them?
Yeah, I think what's important is to not go beyond your comfort zone, right? I think
Good boundaries.
Good boundaries, consent, being clear what you want when you want it. If you don't want it, not feeling like, it's the third date. People have sex by the third date, like whatever rule that you think is in your head, maybe the other person is suggesting it. And enjoy you can be flattered that somebody wants to sleep with you and not sleep with them. And you can even tell them you find them really attractive, and enjoy that, and not feel like, oh, I'm the outsider here. Because believe it or not, there are many people who identify as demisexual or asexual, sometimes for their whole lives, sometimes for a period of their lives. And it's in the process of othering other people's sexuality that we end up making people feel crappy about themselves, which is what we're trying to avoid.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you so much for that. And thank you for talking with me today. Where can people find you if they're interested in hearing more about you, your work, and your practice?
Great. Thanks for that question. There's two places. One, they can follow me on Instagram at Robin Mindful Counseling, or they can go to our website for our whole practice, which is www.hptherapy.com, if they want to register to become a client.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.